I'm Dave Stanley, and welcome to Morada, California. We're located between Lodi and Stockton, and this is home of the Morada Belt Railway, a model railroad in a 20 by 20 building that we started back in 2004. So the model railroad is loosely based on my career working for Central California Traction, Western Pacific, and then Union Pacific. Spent 41 years in the operating departments, retired as a locomotive engineer. The layout is a transition era layout, although we do operate 50s op sessions, and then we also run op sessions based on about 1963, 1964. We try not to intermingle the two, so today's tour we will look at transition era, and then we'll look at some of the newer stuff as well. This is some of the exterior equipment we have. The wigwag is from Central California Traction. We've got a crossbuck off the Sacramento Northern and a few other goodies on the outside of the building as well. Okay, we're at Morada Yard. This is the main classification yard for the railroad. Most of your trains originate or terminate here. Trains will leave Morada, they'll work their way up to the top of the railroad, up through Ridgewood and Acampo, and then back down, and they terminate down here at the east end of the railroad, which is the staging yard, which we call Palisade or Stockton, depending on which railroad is operating. UP and SP trains terminate in Palisade, WP and Santa Fe trains terminate in Stockton. The staging yard is controlled by the staging yard panel. It's an 8-track staging yard. Of course, there's never enough tracks for staging. I like to have another 8. Well, like I said, Morada Yard is the main yard. We have a big icing deck here that Jerry Larson put together, and we'll typically run 2 switch engines a shift at Morada Yard. One will do industry work, and he'll do interchange work. He'll be taking cars from this yard over to Junction City Yard, which we'll look at later on in the show. This other job does train building in the yard and any other classification work that has to be done. The railroad on this side of the room is 3-level. You've got the staging yard, which is the east end, Morada Yard, which is about 1/3 of the way in on the operating plan from the east end. And then, of course, the top level, which is Acampo, which is towards the west end of the railroad. And trains gain elevation through the use of 3 single loop spirals that are located along the railroad. They're worked into the scenery rather than going with a complete helix. Our system that we use is Easy DCC by CVP out of Texas, which I love the system. It's a good system, not knocking any other system. They're all good, but that one I preferred, so I stayed with it. And we use tortoises on all of our turnouts, pretty much on the whole railroad except for the branch line. And what we'll do is we will follow a SPKF Forward train out of the yard here, and we'll move on down the line, leaving Morada, and our next stop will be at Junction City. We're at Junction City, which is the interchange point between the Morada Belt and the short line railroads. They'll come in here during an op session and exchange cars. The gas station will start as a jail innovative design kit that Pat Davis took the kit, used a few parts from the kit, and then created his own gas station, and complete with service bays that are highly detailed, globes that light up with LEDs and so forth. This is a piece of the railroad that's hard to see anymore since we've added the branch line to the top. But this is one of 2 watersheds that Jim Pendley built for me. Jim's a good friend of mine. I used to work with the Union Pacific Railroad. And Jim modeled Tunnel 12, which was on the WP, which was the watershed, which no longer exists. The bridge scene that you're looking at is constructed by Pat. It's a Central Valley kit. Lake Davis is the body of water below it. It's also the name of the siding up above. Pat has modeled this water scene complete with a scratch-built dam modeled after a tailings dam up near Jackson, California. And then there's also a fisherman in his boat with a rainbow trout on his line. Kind of a neat scene that we're real proud of here. This is Basil Newton's ranch. Basil was my wife's uncle, a very nice man. He did a lot of stuff for us here on the property. We just wanted a little something to remember him by. So this is the first thing you see when you walk into the layout room. We're at Eagle's Nest on the layout. This is the site of the J.R. Larson rock quarry. And my good friend Jerry Larson, who's also an excellent model railroader, spent his whole career in the aggregate business. And who else but Jerry would be the perfect guy to come up and design a quarry area. So the quarry sits on top of the third of 3 single loop helixes. This is how we gain elevation on the railroad. And Jerry came in here with a Walters kit, did a lot of additions, some scratch building, and made a very realistic quarry area out of this. And this is one of the places our locals stop and do work. So we're changed trains. Now we're going to have a 1964 era train powered by UP DD35 that Pat Davis has completely taken an Athearn and torn it apart and made it correct. We're going to pass the quarry as we're at this location, and we'll have Jerry explain his thoughts behind designing the quarry.
Hi, my name is Jerry Larson, here to talk about an aggregate plant that I built based on a Walters kit, modifications of course. We start out basically with our rock that has been blasted off the side of here, and this is, in this case, is a limestone rock. The rock is then loaded into plant trucks, such as the one back there, that come over here and dump into this, what we call a grizzly. And from the grizzly, it goes up the conveyor to get to the top of the plant. And starting at the top of the plant, there would be a shaker screen that would size the various materials that that we're going to be producing. And typically it's everything from say 1-inch rock down to what we call a pea gravel. And in this case, we have a special material that we're also building that we'll see on the other side of the plant coming out. So this road is for trucks to come in. They are loaded by the loader out of this stockpile that comes from that conveyor, this conveyor coming out of the building. And then it is loaded in there, and then they come around, and as like this truck is leaving the facility. Okay, now we're on the back side of the aggregate plant. On this side, you can see where the material comes down and goes into these bins, and then also bins that are in the concrete structure. And then this is all for loading the railroad cars. We're running a special product in the plant. It's a dried roof rock. It has to be kept dry, so it comes out of the plant, having been dried inside the plant, comes out, actually crosses over the main, goes into a primary holding facility, and this is where the bulk is held, and then it comes to a bucket elevator and takes it up and puts it into the loading silo for the covered hoppers. And the hoppers, of course, have to be covered because this material needs to be kept dry, just as cement.
Gray Rocks is a name that I always appreciated. It was the name of the location for the Calaveras cement plant in Northern California above Redding along the old SP main line. And I thought for our railroad, Gray Rocks would be the perfect name for this location. Calaveras cement plant designed by Jerry Larson, starting with a Walters kit, and of course he's added a lot more to it. And I'll let Jerry explain his thoughts behind the cement plant.
I was tasked with building a cement terminal for Dave Stanley, actually a cement plant. The reason I was given this task was that I have a background in the aggregates business and cement business. I was the largest supplier of concrete in the Central Valley of California, 22 locations, 135 trucks. So I got tasked with coming up with a cement plant. I've seen a few. This plant in particular is a kit bash for the Walters plant. And so in the beginning, you have your limestone coming in from an offside, non-seam location, which goes into a collection silo. And then from the collection silo, it would go into this building where it would get sized and all that kind of stuff with make sure we have the right size of rock or limestone. That goes into the grinding mill. The grinding mill is back behind here. You really can't see it, but that's where it is ground to a very fine final texture for cement. From there, it goes into the kiln, and it comes out into the blending room. Of course, this is all scaled down because of the limit of space to be able to put this on. But there's a couple of silos in the back that are for gypsum and other additives that go into the cement. From there, it comes up, it's elevated up elevated up out of this building, goes across this conveyor, and this conveyor goes into a primary holding silo. Then from the primary holding silo, it is bucket elevated up, and then it comes over into the storage bins. And this is where the cement is loaded into the hoppers.
Here we are at Acampo. The SP Belt local has arrived and the crew is inside talking to the Acampo agent. The local will stop here and do all the switching of the sheds that we have here. We've got the Sternberg shed, Victor Cold Storage, PJ Gehring shed, and then of course Swift Packing. There's also a team track here at Acampo and a grain elevator that serves beans and rice. The power for the local today are a couple of Black Widow torpedo boats. The PJ Gehring shed used to stand in the town of Victor, California, not too far from here, just outside of Lodi. And that shed burned up quite a few years ago, but Arden Gehring, who was the grandson of PJ Gehring, Arden was a model railroader, lived close by with an S-scale Union Pacific Sherman Hill layout. And Arden's since passed away, but before he passed, he gave me a packing label for the Gehring shed, and I was able to work off of the drawing on the label to come up with this. The story continues. A gentleman by the name of Cliff Gehring was next door at my neighbor's house one day at a meeting, and I saw his name tag, and I asked him how he was related, if he was related to PJ Gehring. He says, well, that's my father. So I said, well, come next door, I want you to see something. So I brought him over here, and he saw the shed. And he says, when I was a kid, he says, I used to pack grapes into PFE reefers at that shed. And I asked him, I said, does this look like your dad's shed? He says, oh yeah, he says, just like it. So I feel like I got that one right. The Victor Cold Storage building is modeled after the Victor Winery, which still stands in the town of Victor. But I lengthened it, changed it from a winery to a cold storage building, and it has a total of 8 spots on it. So that gives us a little more switching activity. Of course, Sternberg Growers, I named that for Larry Sternberg, who has done some work on the layout, just some scenery work, but a good friend of ours, another former Western Pacific employee. And so the local will come up here and he'll spend quite a bit of time switching these industries. At Ridgewood, this is the top of the railroad, top of the grade. The very west end of the railroad, it's also the upper reverse loop where trains change direction and start eastward. The local has come through, and he has done switching at the mill as well as switching at a campo. So he's on his way to the branch now. The west side branch, which is basically named because it's on the west side of the room, even though I have a fondness for SP's west side branch out of Tracy. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind when I named the west side branch. At a campo, the track fans out from the main line and siding to a total of 6 tracks, and the upper track was basically one too many. So by putting the main line in through the buildings, they're able to hide that extra track and take some of the track clutter out of the picture. We're at Oakwild on the west side branch. The local is about to pass through. One of the features on this railroad are the crossbucks that Bruce Barney did. And these early SP crossbucks I've installed on the branch. They say look out for the cars. The wigwag is one of the old Century casting upper quadrant wigwag. I've got an operating one in my side yard here. Oakwild is the first stop on the branch. We have Bear Petroleum, named after my good friend Kirk Bear, who actually did the layout design for this railroad. And then we have Levine Metals, your typical scrapyard. And then we have Kachigian Packing, which is my grandparents' last name, Kachigian. So I have a little packing spur to honor their memory. And typical of the Armenian farmers and packers in the San Joaquin Valley of California. And from Oakwild, we'll head up the hill to the next station, which is Youngstown. Youngstown is on the west side branch. The name is derived from Youngstown Station on the Central California Traction, but that's the only similarity. We've got different industries here. We have a team track, we have valley growers, and we have the livestock spur. The beet loader at Sugarfield was scratch built by Clyde King. It's painted powder blue, which was the Union Sugar colors. And the cars that are loaded at Sugarfield are beets going to a different refinery off the layout. So those cars would be picked up by the local, taken back to Morada yard, and then classified east to a different train down to the staging yard. Up here at the top of the branch at Sheldon is the Greatland Sugar Refinery, and it is served exclusively by SP. So all the beets that come into the sugar plant come in via Southern Pacific. They don't come from the loader that's on around the corner on the branch. So 2 different beet operations. We will run dedicated sugar beet trains on the branch that come right up to the sugar mill. And you get that beet train out here with the west side branch local at the same time, and it makes for some interesting operation. This upper deck of the west side branch was added roughly 3 years ago, and the lower level had been open for viewing for a good 10 years before we finished up the branch line. And basically what we did is we put a cap on the lower level by doing this. But it increased the amount of operation. The branch line originally just went as far as Oakwild and dead ended. So with the full branch line now, we have basically 8 customers that get switched on the line. So the Amador Central's made his set out, and he's waiting for his outbound cars to be switched out. In the meantime, the Junction City switcher SP5206 is on the street switching Tri-State Milling and King Midas flour, as well as the Junction City team track. So the story behind the Tequila Sheila bar at Junction City, a good friend of ours, Steve Phillips, came up to my wife, Shirley, at one of the SP Historical Society conventions, came up and gave her a big old hug and called her Sheila. And I said, Steve, her name's Shirley, not Sheila. And he's like, oh. So I looked at my wife and I said, well, I've always called you Curly Shirley, but I guess your new name will be Tequila Sheila. And the irony is that she doesn't drink. But Pat Davis, when he built this kit, says, hey, I want to put this bar on the layout and let's call it Tequila Sheila's. And I said, sounds great. So we named it that. Pat also put a brothel upstairs. and there's a long story behind that. Nothing to do with my wife's personal behavior. But the one thing I will say is if you run into Shirley at any convention or any place, do anything but don't call her Sheila. The Marauder Roundhouse area, of course, is where all the power for the trains being made up in Morada Yard, all the power originates. There's garden tracks, 3-stall roundhouse. The roundhouse itself is a Walters kit. Behind the roundhouse, in an area that was basically going to be impossible to reach and make it an active part of the layout, we put the Meeker Locomotive Works in memory of my good friend Ken Meeker, who used to do a lot of custom painting for me, and he was a co-worker with me at the railroad as well, just a longtime friend. And the whole story behind Meeker Locomotive Works is when Ken died, they shut the building down, pulled the switch out. If you look at the scene, you can see where the rail was pulled out. The ties are still in place. On the rear end of the locomotive works is a Magma Arizona Baldwin that never got delivered, and it's kind of landlocked on the wrong side of the building for now. One of Ken's early paint jobs, so I thought that would be a good place to preserve it. We're at Sand Pass, which is named after Sand Pass, Nevada. This was a spot that myself and a lot of my friends would go out camping during the winter months of the year, taking train pictures back in the WP days, and then just for a few years after the UP merger. But Sand Pass is always kind of a neat spot for all of us. It's very isolated out there. It's about an hour and a half railroad time east of Portola. And on my layout we have Sand Pass, which is the last siding as you're heading east towards the staging yard, or the first siding west of the staging yard. It's one of two sidings on the railroad where we actually stage meets. And John Signor came along, and there's a little bit of a backdrop back here, and John painted all the backdrop down below, as you'll see. The station sign and all the other station signs on the railroad were made by Pat Davis. This is our deserty feel here for the railroad, just a short stretch, and it's indented here so that if you're making a meet, since the other end of the siding is hidden, you have to stop your train here depending on which way it's heading, and that way you know you're clear of the other end, you're not going to be fouling the other track. But so far it's worked, and like I said, it's kind of a little hidden treasure on the layout. Well, I hope you enjoyed your tour of the Morada Belt Railway. If you want to find out more information about our railroad, you can consult the November 2019 issue of Railroad Model Craftsman, and if your issues go far enough back, we were also in the January 2014 issue of Railroad Model Craftsman. Thanks again for visiting.